Silakan saudara KUHAN daripada Universiti Malaya. Fakulti mana tu
Undang-undang.
Fakulti Undang-Undang, pelajar Fakulti Undang-Undang Universiti Malaya dengan tajuknya Cost of Living versus Lifestyle. Dipersilakan.
Actually saya dah tukar tajuk.
Tukar tajuk. Okey, tajuk apa tu?
Challenges faced by Malaysia for cost of living and solutions.
Okey, tanpa melengahkan masa lagi, dipersilakan saudara KUHAN daripada Universiti Malaya. Dipersilakan.
Okay, before I start, I'm the only one that didn't memorize my script because I didn't know it's part of the thing, so I will not use the mic because I need to flip the paper. Okay? Gentry that's unjustly acquired, chained by exorbitant prices of housing, petroleum and education that prevents them from propelling forward, annihilated by disproportionate salaries that prevents them from accessing basic amenities that allows them to live. Ladies and gentlemen, women and children are sleepwalking into a future of surviving and not living. I think that's cruel. Living is something everyone should have. Let's not sleepwalk anymore, let's wake them up. A very good morning. I'd like to meet the panel of adjudicators, learned participants and members of the hall. The first part of my speech is I'll give 5 different ways we're facing a challenge in terms of the rising of living cost of Malaysia. The first is in terms of housing affordability. According to iProperty, an average price of a house is 439,000 ringgit in Malaysia. That means a vast majority of the population are victims of perpetual rent trap and they're not able to have any form of amenities to buy mortgages to pay for house. That's an impossibility for them. The second challenge of the rising costs in Malaysia is rising food prices. And the reason why this is the case is because Malaysia is a heavily import-based country and most of our ingredients come externally to produce food. And the reason why this is a problem is because due to supply chain disruptions as a result of the Ukraine and Russian war, most of the imports that we're getting are significantly priced higher. More importantly, the value of the ringgit pegged to USD is significantly lower, which means any import that we bring in is substantially more expensive. The third challenge that we face in terms of the rising living costs is transportation. If you were to take a look at the pockets of Klang Valley, where it's huge congestion, traffic jams everywhere, we have to resort towards sharing economies like Grab and AirAsia. And fun fact, I just came from Ipoh, took a bus yesterday midnight to make it to this event, and my Grab fare was 45 ringgit from KL Central to UM, which is basically just a 10 minutes ride, because fare is high in demand because of congestion. But if you own a car, that's still substantially expensive, because the inflationary spiral makes diesel prices and petroleum prices significantly higher, which means moving is not really an option, it's a cost and it's a challenge. That's the third challenge that we face because of transportation. The fourth challenge that we face is in terms of healthcare. Malaysia is currently an overburdened public healthcare system with huge influx of patients. But what's worse is that most patients don't even have basic amount of coverage for medical insurances that gives them coverage for things like injuries outside of accidents, outside of workplace environments, and that needs to change. The final challenge that we face based on rising costs in Malaysia is education. Not every single person here has the luxury of entering a public university, which means the default that they have is private university. According to After School Malaysia, the cost of private education is about 31,000 ringgit to 245,000 ringgit per course. That is an entire life savings for some families. These are huge challenges that we need to solve. Now that I've structurally established 5 challenges that we're facing due to rising living costs, I'm going to go on to the second part of the speech by explaining 5 broad solutions that correspond to these problems and how we can approach that. First, let's talk about housing. What does Malaysia have? Malaysia has a lot of comprehensive housing programs like iMiliki, Scheme Rumah Pertamaku, which are all affordable housing programs in order to help most vulnerable get access to housing. But I think this is a problem-solution mismatch. Why? The problem isn't that vulnerable people are not getting a house. The problem is the rich, the powerful, and the elites in our country are hoarding properties. And that's a huge problem. That's exactly why my hometown Perak did an amazing thing. The program called Rumah Perakku, which has a legal caveat and restricting every single person to only one low-cost home, which means rich people and the elites cannot massively hoard properties and say, we bought all these properties because we can, and that locks out people who cannot. So instead of having more subsidized housing, let's have restriction of people of owning property, and I think that's a more strategic plan to provide access for housing. Secondly, let's talk about food. Existingly, the government's doing a great job. We have subsidized essential food items like flour, chicken, and egg, and we have the minimum and maximum price control for it as well. Last year, we spent 14 billion ringgit on subsidies. This year, we increased to 16 billion ringgit in subsidies. That's great. That amount is much like one of the highest in the world right now in terms of subsidies. Malaysia hasn't stopped there. We also have the menu Rama. I know all of y'all know this as well. 5 ringgit menu in MacD, Mary Brown. Y'all are all smiling. You probably paid for it as well, even though you can afford something expensive. Don't worry, I did that the same thing as well, because we're all cheap here. But I think these initiatives are still not enough. What is the better solution? Look at Canada and look at the United States. They have this application called Flash Food. And it's a very interesting, brilliant application. Because Flash Food is an application that collaborates with restaurants, and they allow people like you and I to purchase leftovers from the restaurants that are not sold at the end of the day at a much better discounted rate. That's an important solution, because 16,688 tons of food are wasted per day in Malaysia that could feed 2.2 million people in Malaysia every single day. So the problem isn't how we logistically give more access of food, it's how we make use economically of the wastage of food and redistribute back to the poor. That's why applications like this should exist in Malaysia, where people can not only afford cheaper prices of food, but restaurant quality food at a cheaper price. That solution is a much better way to target the food problem. Thirdly, let's talk about transport. Existingly, we are paying so much of money to ETS to create the new railroad from Perlis to Singapore. Ask ourselves, is this really necessary? Do we need a train from Perlis to Singapore in an area where we have so much access to free routes? I would say, maybe instead of doing this, let's instead put all of this money to pan-colonial train system in East Malaysia. Where East Malaysia, to travel from one point to another, you have to take Grab. And Grab is exorbitantly expensive, as I just illustrated in the 40-minute example. If you have LRT systems in East Malaysia, it takes 60 cents to go to every station. That could be put into money, put into savings, that could be an entire service investment for people to actually propel forward, instead of wasting money for transport in areas that are already people. Fourthly, healthcare. I'm a law student, so I'm going to bore you all by talking about a bit of sections here. According to the International Labour Organization, ILO, they had a bare minimum requirement for several protections. They have 9 pillars that include medical protections, security protections, but most of these things aren't covered by PESO. So PESO doesn't cover so much of coverage in regards to accidents that happen in workplace, or outside of accidents. What we need to do as Malaysia is ratify the ILO so that PESO is binded by ILO to give the minimum protection. We have a more comprehensive coverage. We can have matters like medical care, employment injury, or specific provisions for younger people and older people. These provisions are far more comprehensive coverage of insurance that will give people access to medical care, because existingly they don't have. And I think that's a much more equitable manner that goes about this way. Finally, on education. Recently, a U10 graduate went viral in his convocation by speaking out about how matriculation needs to be more inclusive. I know this competition says don't touch on race and religion, but I'm brave enough to say that it's not a racial issue, it's a national issue. We need to include qualified Malaysians who are potential to get education. If their qualifications and they meritocratically can get into a place in matriculation, they should. The solution to education is to expand people who can provide for it, and that's how we solve the education problem. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude my speech, rising cost of Malaysia is an issue. It's a problem, of course. I'm not denying it. But the collaboration of citizens like you and I, collaborations between corporations and tech giants, collaborations between politicians and state leaders, we can enact change. Let's stop saying no. Don't ever say equal no me. Start saying equal yes me. Thank you for listening.